The Timeshift.
Hello and welcome to this week's review on Doctor Who. This week I'm reviewing the episode Dot and Bubble from Season 14/Season 1, depending on how you want to categorise all of this. And we start off this review, as we often do with these reviews, by talking about the story, the writing and tangentially related matters. Now, I think it's time for us to honour that time-honoured tradition on this channel by eliminating any pretense and by just grasping the thistle and saying, I really have no idea how to feel about this episode. To be quite honest with you, I feel that this is an episode that people are going to be talking about and debating for quite some time, but not necessarily for the right reasons. Again, I really have no idea how to feel about all of this because there are elements within it that I really do like and I really do love, but as a whole entity, I really don't feel that this episode hangs well together at all. It feels rather wonky, the pacing at times just really doesn't work for me, and I'd hate to say it, but I've got to say, I think that ending really doesn't deserve to be connected to an episode like this. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be discussing about how this episode changed focus seemingly midway through, when in reality for me, it kind of just changed focus in the last 5 minutes. How this all started out as an episode about social media and then transitioned into one about class and classism. And for me, I'm going to be honest, it feels like a case of close but no cigar. They didn't quite stick the landing. I can see how this would have worked, but I can't at this particular moment put my hand on and say, this is the thing that made it work, this is the thing that didn't make it work. I feel as though, again, there are many elements in this episode that are good, but I don't think that either side of this program, this episode about social media and then class and classism, I don't think either of those elements is really sufficiently developed for my liking. And of course then we end up introducing extra bonus elements like the killer AI and the army of killer slugs, which ultimately goes absolutely nowhere. Hey, maybe to discuss in a future episode. Right now we don't know, but I'm gonna guess it probably isn't. I know a lot of people are gonna hate the social media aspect of this episode, particularly in the early parts of it, when we have this hyper-satirized look at a Zoomer apocalypse, which I don't want to say it, but I think I have to, because, these are my own personal feelings, but at the end of the day, all the stuff connected to social media felt like it was written by someone who doesn't quite understand social media, either from a technical point of view or from a social construct point of view, which is understandable given who's writing it, but at the same time, to be fair, ultimately this isn't what the episode is about, so you can kind of forgive it for not going full tilt into creating an authentic experience, and quite frankly, had it continued to be about social media, it would have felt terribly out of touch by the end of it. But throughout this episode, there are hints at there being something bigger here. Like, this is greater commentary about social media and about its impact upon the young, about the impact upon the Zoomer and Gen Alpha generation, and to a certain degree millennials as well, but it doesn't quite end up going there. It feels as though it stops itself before it gets to a point where it has something very specific and deliberate to say. I have been in theatre pieces about social media at a time before social media became a thing. I've seen feature films where social media is a major factor of it. Horror movies where it's a major factor of it. And even in all those things, no matter how good or bad they are, it felt as though they had a clearer and more nuanced understanding of social media. Why some people can't just switch the screen off. Why some people can't decouple themselves from that. And it feels like this episode is getting close to being able to explain why that is the case, but it ultimately doesn't get to that natural conclusion of this. This episode hints at this really nasty, creepy, techno-horror nightmare where the second screen is part of us. It's part of human existence, but not in a cybernetic or a transhuman way, but in a blindfold kind of way, like the blinkers on a horse, stopping you from seeing the worst in the world and helping you to avoid doing human things just because you find them icky or inconvenient, as hinted by the Dr. P character. Where we live in a world, or these characters live in a world, where interpersonal human interaction is becoming increasingly alien and physically incomprehensible. the idea that someone cannot find their way around without an arrow telling them where to go seems goofy and weird, but in a world and in a universe where social media has this stranglehold on these characters, it makes a twisted and rather nasty sense to it, especially if you're someone who plays video games where you'll have the arrows telling you where you have to go all the time. It is taking this vision of the 11-year-old that has spent the past 7 years glued to their tablet watching YouTube videos and seeing what that kind of upbringing would end up having upon an entire civilization, an entire society, where that just kept building up and building up and building up to the point where people cannot focus and cannot function without a phone or a tablet in their hand. All of that horrifying, terrifying, nightmarish stuff that the episode ultimately doesn't really go far enough with. To a certain degree, it treats it like window dressing. To a certain regard, it just treats it like mechanics. This is just an element of this world, which I can understand, because ultimately that's not what the episode is about. But again, it feels as though we were close to saying something here. We had created this world where people cannot function without their phone or phone equivalent, but then they can. Again, this isn't what the story is ultimately about, and there's a part of me that can't help but feel that maybe this is what the story was about. That maybe in the original draft of this episode, not to be too cynical or too flippant here, but maybe in the original draft this was a planet of YouTubers, this was a planet of social media influencers, and they're all being offed one by one, maybe because the AI hates them, or maybe because they've got too few subscribers. Maybe Russell T Davies had something more in mind that was connected to that, or just built on the social media element even more, but ultimately didn't go down that path because he might have been worried that people might not have understood it. Or I think Russell T Davies wrote this, I'm not 100% sure, I'd have to double check the credits on it, but at the end of the day, this ultimately becomes an episode about class and classism, and I suppose you could ultimately see a version of that ending where the Doctor's rejected not because he's in a lower social class, but because he isn't part of the popular clique, he isn't part of the million plus YouTuber club or what have you. That ultimately does end up being, but we still have our characters that are introduced in this episode living in a hyper-focused social media world, and ultimately the commentary about that and about the existence of the second screen doesn't go far enough. This feels like it should be a world where the second screen is the key to everything and people literally cannot live without it, which itself would make that ending even more harrowing if you just blent into that more, even if you weren't going to make this about a social media criticism, where at the end you have all these characters setting off to live in the wilderness with zero survival skills, but are doing it out of a false sense of optimism because they have been grown and cultivated by social media to become incapable of seeing the darker side of life. They're literally got to a point where they are shutting out the possibility that something bad could happen to them, and they're just going out into this like, heck guys, we're gonna have the bestest time out there in the woods. I know where how to tell where Cardinal North is. Oh, that's gonna help us. But ultimately end it doesn't, and we get a rather ambiguous nihilistic ending, which I love, but again I do wish was in a different episode. The whole thing about the killer AI and this army of slugs is neat, but I don't know where we were supposed to go with that. It feels like, okay, this isn't what... at the end of the day, the killer slug thing isn't what the episode is about. It's about the social commentary. I get that. But it's introduced and presented in such a way as though it should be connected to it. That there should be this extra element here. But, it's the AI killing them. It's the algorithm killing them. But it ultimately doesn't go that way, because... to me, ultimately, I think that the introduction of the killer AI and the killer slugs, to a certain degree, undermines this theme of the corrupting nature of social media, but it also undermines the idea that this story is about class, as the reason why all these people are being offed is alphabetical. It's not because, this family's got a greater net worth than the other, or this is from a family that has a lineage all the way back to the Habsburgs or whatever. No, it's just alphabetical. There's nothing else to it apart from the alphabet. Now, this whole classism element is a neat thing to add into it, and whilst it is teased here and there, it feels like it's teased in a way which is meant to give us context to justify why all these young, dumb 20-somethings are on this planet without any means of being able to project or really have such a narrow focus on, you know, everything that's going on. And when we introduce that into the latter half of the episode, the dying embers of the episode, it doesn't quite work for me because it doesn't feel like it's as much as a coherent and consistent element without, and it just ends up feeling like a means to get to a bleak end. And there's a part of me that can't help but wonder, is this whole element about class and classism really going to play well outside of the UK? Because I've seen some limited commentary online with people interpreting the ending that the reason why they're rejecting the Doctor and choosing not to go with him is not because they see him as being a lower social class than them. They are doing it because it's a race thing, and whether that was the intent or not, I don't know, but that's the conclusion that a lot of people are ultimately going to come up to, which then makes all the teases and the build-up to that ending less effective, as now people are going to be looking at it as a matter of race rather than a matter of class, which certainly does feel like it was the intended endpoint of all of this. I think that these two concepts, these two ideas of making an episode which is both about social media and both about class, or transitioning to the two of them, I think can work, and it could work, but an element that could have maybe improved that would have been to establish the mechanics of this world and the characters a little bit better, how we spent a little bit more time to understand how this world worked, why it works the way that it does do, rather than almost immediately jumping into the big, scary, nasty slug monsters. Slug monsters which, once again, monsters in broad daylight. Again, I'm sat here like I was last week thinking, oh boy, imagine how creepy and nasty this would be if all of this happened at night. You know, where these nasty, slimy monsters are dragging people into the darkness. Which is what we don't get. There's that moment where all the people are getting got by the slugs, which is really creepy and nasty and unsettling. But I'm just thinking, you could take it to the next level, but ultimately don't. And that's what it feels like a lot of this episode is. It's, you could have taken it to the next level, but you didn't. Again, there's a lot I do enjoy about it. I do like this bleaker, rather miserable ending about all of this. I like the fact that this lead character that we're following for most of the episode ultimately turns out to just being a shit. I really do like that, and the one genuinely nice person in this entire community is killed off purely and simply because they tried to do the right thing, and it does it in a way which feels like a really nasty gut punch. And I like that. I like the darker, nastier aspects of it, but it doesn't quite go there enough for me. When we talk about the performance side of things, and we now pivot into the performances, Gatwa's ending bit was fantastic. Just the sheer rage that he felt he couldn't save everybody because they refused to be saved is brilliant. And it was done in a way which didn't feel typically Doctor Who. You know, it just flicked in the back of my mind then, oh yeah, I could easily see a moment where the Doctor makes this big impassioned speech, and then you get the screaming with rage that he can't save people moment. But this time we don't get that. He tries his best to make them understand. He tries his best to, but at the end of the day, they reject him. Millie Gibson playing Ruby, I don't want to say anything bad about it because at the end of the episode, end of the day, she wasn't really utilised all that much. You could have done a thing like with the episode Blink where you just see the snaps of the Doctor, which could have worked, maybe worked. Like I say, there's elements of this episode I do like. The idea that someone has to survive this nasty alien invasion thing and the only thing that can help them is Snapchat. I weirdly find a creepy and cool idea. But at the end of the day, it doesn't quite go with that. The actor playing the main character that we follow for most of the episode, good enough, though the transition point we get to towards the end of the episode doesn't work for me. How we go from someone that's kind of ditzy and out of their element to suddenly becoming rather cold and detached at the end of it doesn't quite work with me. It feels as though there should have been a hint of something to her that was kind of off up until that moment. I really don't know, and I suppose for the sake of mentioning it, we should mention it. Oh, Susan Twist is back again. Who could she be? Even the characters are pointing out at this moment. You know, much like in, Boomtown, where the Doctor pointed out that, oh boy, this bad wolf thing sure is a recurring theme. Oh boy, I wonder what all that's about. Oh, grief. Anyway, into the overview. Like I say, I really don't know what to feel about it, because there's elements of it that feel tailor-made for me in a way. It has a lot of things I really do love and enjoy in science fiction. There's elements of it I think could really work fantastically well in an episode of Doctor Who, but at the end of the day, it all doesn't quite hang well together for me. And again, like I said earlier in the review, I don't understand what it is that doesn't make this work for me. It's like there's an element missing of it. It's like going to a restaurant and having your favourite meal, but maybe there's a spice missing, or there's a vegetable missing from it, or there's just something that isn't quite there and you just can't figure out what it is, and it kind of drives you a bit screwy, and this is the same thing. Maybe it's a sense of this episode needed to be darker for me, both literally in a tense sense of it's happening broad fucking daylight for most of it, and thematically, there's a part of me that would have liked it if it went even deeper down the rabbit hole of the dangers of social media, or the darker side of class and classism, had it really played into the subscriber-follower culture, but ultimately it doesn't end up doing that. As I said earlier in the review, I really don't know how this episode is going to be responded to online, and how this will end up being felt into the not too distant future. But I think of all the episodes, certainly of all the standalone episodes we've had thus far, this is the one that a lot of people will debate and discuss more so. More so than Boom, and certainly more so than the previous episode. Not necessarily because it's good, but because I think there'll be a lot of debate as to, well, I think a lot of people are just going to take the opening 5 minutes of it, get pissed off about all the seemingly slight Zoomer angst against them, and then kind of think the episode's crap. But I really don't know. You guys let me know in the comment section down below. And with all that in mind, it's time for Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner. I'm too poor to afford a jingle. Woo! We kick off with Big X1, who says, and this is in regards to the previous episode, 73 Yards, I like this one, but I think I like the last one more. Fair cop. I've heard a lot of debate and discussion over the previous one. Apparently, there's a lot of people out there that really fucking hated it. I don't know why. Maybe it's the political stuff towards the end of the episode. I really don't know. Honestly, if it is a politics thing, I'd rather not get into it. But hey ho, I enjoyed the episode. I still don't know if I like that one more or Boom. I'd have to go back and rewatch them to be sure. Next up, we have Dingo Goldie 9716, who says, yes, the episode is a casual paradox time loop story. The loop is instigated by 15 creating a information paradox by telling Ruby spoilers about the future. CF Roscoe's Basilisk. The trampling breaking of the thread of the fairy suckle is a unsubtle symbolism. During the Devil's Chord, didn't 15 talk about staying a certain distance between his previous sense in London in order to prevent knotting and breaking of his own timelines? I see 73 Yards as a companion piece to Boom, as it addresses why 15 can't simply go back from the future and prevent himself from ever stepping on the landmine. Whatever future Ruby signs to everybody, abandon the young Ruby is a Mishi, but it doesn't matter. Thank you for your comment, and I do apologise for getting my reading of that rather back to front. I struggle with reading things aloud, particularly if I've not had time to reverse it, but I do appreciate the insight they've been given with this particular episode and how it ends up connecting more and potentially connects more with the previous episodes. It will be interesting to see if the feeling that I have and others have is true, that this episode is going to play more into future episodes in a way that isn't just thematic, but we'll soon see about that. Let me know what you thought about this particular episode down below, because I've got a feeling a lot of people have got a lot to say about it. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!